I'll give the floor to my colleague Archana to give us the ground rules and introduce the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So we're very excited to have this webinar series on polling through social media platforms, an example using Facebook. My name is Archana Dvavetti, and I am working with the data collection unit in the data and analytics section here at UNICEF headquarters. This is the third in the webinar series that we have resumed after we had paused for a few months, so we're very excited about today's webinar. So social media polls are becoming more and more prominent, as we all know, and this presentation will provide an overview of the basics of the method, illustrate what purposes these data are fit for, and what it should not be used for. The presentation will also discuss any bias issues, typical challenges for implementation and costs that are associated. An example will be provided of a partnership between Facebook and academic institutions to create a global COVID-19 symptom survey. Issues such as what partnerships face, the skills needed for such large survey data collections, as well as early results from the new vaccine module will be discussed. We are very excited to have Professor Frauke Kreuter with us today. She is a professor of statistics and data science at the Ludwig-Maximilians-University of Munich and co-director of data science centers at the University of Maryland and Mannheim. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Kreuter is the founder of the International Program for Survey and Data Science, developed in response to increasing demand from researchers and practitioners and bright tools to face a changing data environment. She is also co-founder of the Coleridge Initiative, whose goal is to accelerate data-driven research and policy around human beings and their interactions for program management, policy development, and scholarly purposes by enabling efficient, effective, and secure access to sensitive data about society and the economy. Finally, Dr. Kreuter is the co-founder of the German language podcast, Dig Deep. So before we begin, a couple of housekeeping issues. We've scheduled an hour and a half today and about 45 minutes for presentation and then followed by Q&A. As always, throughout the webinar, kindly keep muted and write your questions as we go in the chat box, and then we will try to group your questions and direct them to Frauke during the Q&A period. This webinar is being recorded and we will have it available on our SharePoint site after the session today, where you can find the link in the emails that you have received. We also plan to post this onto a public site soon, so that colleagues who are not with us at UNICEF can also access it. So Frauke, the floor is yours. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Is the sound okay? Just double checking here.
Yes, it's very good. Thank you.
Great. As you heard in the announcement, an example will be provided, and I thought it might help us all here if I lead with the example so that you see the context in which this particular social media polling happened. And then I will zoom out a bit and discuss other ways to do social media polling if you don't have such partnership. I hope we can keep this interactive. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I try to keep the presentation brief-ish so that we have ample time for the discussion. All right. So let me start and just give a quick nod to all the team members. I'm presenting here, but I'm definitely not the only one involved. And this has been in particular heavily supported by a series of graduate students as part of the joint program in survey methodology at the University of Maryland. Some of you might know that program. We have a lot of online courses available for people who do surveys in particular the context of official statistics in government agencies. So this particular polling endeavor came out of the need early in the pandemic to have a syndromic surveillance system. So something that enables policymakers and public health officials to very quickly make decisions on where to move resources to and to have data available before they hit from testing and hospital records and what have you. And so several groups approached Facebook and were interested in seeing that, can they reach on behalf of different governments, large segments of the target population. They, not only do they have this wide reach, they also have the technical infrastructure to poll in a way that would help mitigate any possible biases. And I will talk about that more in a moment. So let me show you how we poll here in this particular example. Those of you who use Facebook know there is this news feed that people see when they are on their Facebook side. And on the top of the news feed, you see when you are selected into the survey, an invitation naming the sponsor and providing some context about the survey, and then the request to take the survey. Once people agree to this and walk through the consent pages, sorry for the flip, then they see they get transported over to a web survey software called Qualtrics, either at the University of Maryland for all international surveys or at Carnegie Mellon University for those that do the survey in the US. Facebook does not receive any responses. They only get an indicator from us that the survey was received or filled out, and then we get a bias back from, a bias correction weight back from them that includes the sampling probabilities and non-response bias adjustment. I'll talk more about that in a moment. The survey data are then shared out publicly via an API and through data use agreements individually. So this is a very special form of polling through a social media platform. It is only possible in this partnership with Facebook because it's on top of the newsfeed and it has a probability-based sample given the population of Facebook users. What everyone can do without the partnership is poll through Facebook or Twitter or any of the social media sites where you buy advertisement space, and then you invite people, that's depicted here on the right, you invite people to take the survey, and we have here a learn more button, where people might click on, and then too, they get transported to the Qualtrics platform. So, down the road, it's the same process, but how the invitation works is quite different between these two methodologies. And I will walk you through both of them, and then we can in the Q&A discuss sort of pros and cons of these different things. So the survey instrument itself, in this particular survey with the partnership with CMU, is made out of a segment that has a consent questions. It has a segment about health symptoms. It has a segment about contacts that people have with others, about mental health, economic and other insecurities, a segment on vaccination, and a segment on demographic characteristics. By now, over 40 million people answered the survey, and about 17 million globally, and about 17 million did this in the US. Now, the key part, why this is pretty exciting to us and what's unique about this survey, is that there is a non-response weight that is attached to the survey, as I mentioned before, and that's calculated by Facebook as the inverse probability that a sample user completed the survey using information that Facebook has about the respondents on their platform, right? And this, together with the post-stratification weight that Facebook is creating using population benchmarks, for example, from the US American Community Survey or the UN Population Division, that creates a pretty strong way to mitigate selection biases. So, the left side is sort of removing any bias that comes from non-participation, and the right side attempts to remove bias from not being part of the Facebook user group. Now, given that the survey has a lot of demographic information itself, anyone using the data could use the right side, the post-stratification information, in addition to adjust for post-stratification rates. So let me share with you some insights on how these data are used. There have been, interesting attempts, in particular, IHME, for example. They had used these data early on to show how mask usage happens across the world, where the policy works, where it doesn't. And you can see reports not just on IHME, but also on our social data science website. Increasingly, there was interest in monitoring over time financial anxiety of the COVID cases for Vietnam, South Korea, South Africa, different trends depicted here. But also, as I said, most recently, interest in the newly formed vaccination question. A lot of countries are wondering, will people take up the vaccination once it's available to them? And if not, what are the worries that are related to that? Why wouldn't they do that? As I said before, there's data access available for these surveys through the Global Survey Data Map and the US survey data, but also through the microdata. And you can see here a link and an email website on how these can be made available. Right now we have over 50 institutions that already have a data use agreement and many individual users within those groups. So we have a process here where, increasingly we add results onto the form, onto the website, so that you can individually also play around with the data and examine trends in the data for different variables cut by another way. Just need to pause here for 1 second. There have been other data sources made available by Facebook that and other surveys, polls on the platform done in a similar way, for example, through the Future of Business survey, on the survey of gender equality at home, and preventive health surveys. This particular one is the first one, and it's interesting to see how not just Facebook, but also other companies are trying to share their data for good, and are making these data available either in aggregated form or not. Now, in order to use the data, via the survey data, it is a lot of them. The 40 million responses, that's not a small feat, to do. And so it is important here to keep in mind that, what is the pipeline of the survey that is going on here? There is a random sample of Facebook users that gets recruited by Facebook, right? And then they take voluntarily the survey on Qualtrics, but we, as the university teams, pull the data from the web platform. We compile a list of participant tokens, send it back to Facebook. They construct with the data science team the inverse probability weights for each participant, and then attach it back to us so that we can prepare the response files. This process here, is very much reflecting sort of the general data science protocol here, starting from a research question over a data generating process to data curation, storage, data analysis, and data output. And what I noticed is that a lot of our teams on the survey side, we are not necessarily used to handling that large of a volume of data, doing these surveys globally at the same time on the web. is a different data management task than we would normally have. So that was quite challenging indeed. And I recommend, beefing up skills on that have. The challenges that we also have is, changing the instrument with the changing needs. So any polling, that tries to keep up with the current development of a process is likely going to have issues here as well. We also, obviously, with the speed this happened, weren't necessarily able to translate or pretest all of the translations and things like that. So, scaling this up is something that needs to be considered quite a bit ahead of time when doing this. So what I would like to do is pause here for a second, let you a chance to write down the question on the global symptom survey in the chat so that we can come back to it later on. And I'll give you, let's say, 3 minutes for that. And then I'll move on to this other type of polling that uses the advertisement. And then we can discuss all of this in between. Is that an okay process?
Sure, yes, please.
Excellent. All right, I'll be right back. I set my timer for 3 minutes and then we'll continue.
No problem. So everyone, if you'd like to write your questions in the chat and then we can ask them to Frauke at the end, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry, Frauke, we can't hear you. Hello, Frauke, can you hear me?
Yep. All good.
Perfect.
All right, great. So I can't see the questions yet, given how my setup is. I need to close my screen share, but I'll do that once we're done. So I'm moving on now to the second part of polling on social media sites that we've done, luckily with the funding of the National Science Foundation through an award made also in this COVID context, with the goal to evaluate very rapidly effects on labor market and social and mental health outcomes. And here too, speed was of the essence and reaching a lot of people. And so the desire and attempt was there to see, how can social media platforms be used to collect polling data. And if you don't have such partnership, as I described before. And so in this particular grant, we compared questions from a probability-based survey in the US that's done on the web with data fielded on Facebook in that structure that I explained before, where you field basically an invitation and then issue the survey like an ad, and then you collect the responses. So we added a couple of more experiments there since we are survey methodologists and building on leverage salience theory, where the notion is that tailored invitation letters should positively affect participation in the survey. We explored how different images that can be used here at the beginning of these invitations will change the recruitment and that we have here for the data collection. And so we have looked at these two questions, the different image effects one, the other one, the comparison of recruiting via social media polling sites compared to how it would such result would look like when we recruit more traditionally through probability-based web panels, like the survey from USC Dornsife. This might probably not be familiar with anyone, this audience, but basically what the Dornsife survey does is they're using addresses from the US Postal Service, invite people via mailing to participate in a web survey. And so basically what you compare here is people being invited via Facebook through an advertisement that they see in their newsfeed or that's recommended by friends versus a sample where we really know the sampling probabilities and had everyone in the population, right? And so did you understand how this is done? Here too is some mechanics. This without the partnership context, you yourself can create a Facebook account and a web page, and then you can select an advertisement goal that this account wants to have. And this can be, get as many visitors to the site, for example, which was of interest for us here when we fielded the survey. And then you create an ad that in our case was a simple description like, please take 3-minute survey about COVID-19 and share your thoughts and experiences. And then we uploaded an image. Here's the example for the COVID-19 survey image. And then the image I showed you before with the yes, no, that was an alternative image that we launched to see how much image affects sort of the progression of this advertisement part. And then in step 5, you can select what this button should be like, and it can be when we did this learn more. And then you give the location where the learn more button brings you to. And in our case, that was the UMD Qualtrics installation directly to that survey platform. And then you can categorize what kind of advertisement this is and what audience you want. We didn't, reduce this to the US adults, general population. You could, of course, put any country of your liking in here and then say an age range for the number of people, for the age, interval that you would want to have. So that's the setup here. And then you decide on a time period that you would want to have. In this case here, we had the ad run continuously for 7 days, and we said we want to each day not spend more than $14 or something like that. This is a price sort of per time people see the ad, right? Or actually click on the ad. I forgot what it is, or the budgeting one. But in general, this is a very cheap way of collecting data. And then the advertisement placement, whether it's just Facebook or also on Messenger and Instagram. And then there are a couple of preview options, so you can take a look how it looks on your desktop or on the mobile phone. And in video streams and in Facebook stories, so that you get a sense of how would people see this invitation to take the survey. There are a couple of definitions for these Facebook ad metrics, and that's why I stumbled in trying to understand the prices we had set here, but you see it here on the right. There is sort of the cost per click. This is 20 cents for actual link clicks. So, we had, in our case, for 790 link clicks, we spent about $200, right? And we, in order to get those roughly 1,000 people to click on the link and then presumably take the survey, we had, a much larger reach. So 15,000 people saw the advertisement. And you see the definition of reach. This is the number of people who saw the ad at least once, right? And this terminology of reach is different than the terminology of impressions, which impressions could be multiple views of your ads by the same people. Here, it's really the number of different people. And so then they get moved from Facebook to the Qualtrics survey. There's a landing page on our Qualtrics survey that sort of explains who the usual consent form information, who does the survey, what do we see here, and the like. And then, just a preview in case this is of interest to you, the experiment in the different advertisement images that we fielded here. And under each image, you can see the reach we got, so how many different people saw it, the engagement in Facebook metrics terms, and then the actual link clicks on the survey that is much smaller, right? You see here we started out with, about 8,600 neutral, down to 560 in the control, 15,000 with the COVID image, much larger rate, and 790 actual link clicks then here. All right. So this is a very, very quick browse through the survey. And now I'm happy to answer all your questions. I think that the nuts and bolts of this are much better explained with the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Frauke. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for this very interesting presentation of a new method. Let me try to browse through and help you with the questions. The questions that I have seen so far are all, I think, related to bias, weighting, sampling issues.
Okay, excellent.
So the first question that I would like to direct to you is there a level of penetration of the social media platform below which it is impossible to correct the bias?
So this is very difficult to answer. I don't think there is a level in terms of percentages, right? But the question is are the people that are on the platform similar to the people who are not on the platform, right? And so in countries where the participation on Facebook is, primarily, a function of how much income people have, right? And there's no one on the lower income segments not on the platform. That's a bias you cannot correct. Now, the reason I'm still pretty confident about the survey answers that we see in this particular survey is that we have here a situation in which we sample from the same population over time, right? So we're really interested in changes over time. If we assume that the composition of the population hasn't changed over time, right? Then what we see here in trend over time might be shifted, but still valid, right? Because we don't have an hypothesis on how, the change over time should be different in let's say in the development of COVID compared to everyone else in the population, right? So a lot of the bias can be corrected, but the interesting part is the change over time. Circling back to the question of percentage, I don't think there's a threshold. It does depend on the composition of the people, and if you at least reach someone of all population parts in order to make that go away with the weighting.
Okay, it's not really the level of response, but or the Facebook users, but really the comparative composition of the responders to the general population. To the
Correct.
extent it's similar, then the bias will be minimized.
Well, in the case of COVID, I mean, it does depend on your research question too, right? I mean, if you think that the attitudes towards vaccination or your likelihood of catching the disease is independent of Facebook usership, I mean, being on Facebook or not, then the bias probably doesn't matter in this case. For me, it's much more important what the survey provides, that you have a place where people go anyway, not because they want to take a survey on COVID, right? We saw early on in the pandemic, a lot of websites pop up and said, come here, tell us how you're doing. And a lot of people did that, and a lot of data were collected. But there, we don't know anything about those that didn't come by the website, right? I mean, we have no sense, no background information, and no random invitation that then allows us to sample a variety of people, right? So in that sense, I do think it is of much higher quality, this kind of setup than we would see in other contexts.
Okay, there's another question. First, can you please expand a little bit more or unpack the post-stratification methodology? And we are also wondering if that methodology is available publicly.
Yes, it is available publicly. There is an ArchiveX paper that describes the sampling and weighting procedure. And I guess you guys can share the link. I can share that paper. It's there are 2 open source papers that relate to this survey, and I'm happy to send both to this group, and maybe you can pass it on to the participants. I can also try to post that in the chat here, but a little challenge with the multitasking on this one machine. So yes, those are available. And roughly speaking, what this does, we use region 1 population indicators on age and gender for each of the countries, and do the post-stratification with simple ranking to those. So that it's not very complicated. Those are the initial ones that Facebook provides. Now, as I said, if people have access to the microdata, there could be much more sophisticated work being done on the post-stratification, or using small area estimation technique to create a better sample composition, right? In the sense that we have the possibility to, let's say we ask for income, or we ask for comorbidities, right? Are there other bigger healthcare issues that people have that should be taken into account? And if, to the extent that those would be available from outside data sources, that could be used as additional stratification variables.
Thank you, Frauke. Another question: how does Facebook, in selecting sampling among the Facebook users, how does it deal with people who have duplicate accounts, duplicate Facebook accounts?
That is an interesting question. That is an interesting question. I would need to go back to the Facebook people to find out. It has never come up in our discussion. So I'm not sure. So, I mean, to the extent that Facebook would know about it, they could select for it. But if this is, I mean, if I pretend to be 2 different people, then of course one wouldn't know that, right? So, but I'm happy to circle back with an answer. I'm not aware of that having been discussed. Yeah.
Okay. By the way, what is the level of use of Facebook in different countries? Like in the US, for instance, what percentage of the population are Facebook users?
Yeah, it's those are number. I mean, so Pew Research has done a lot of polls, to get that value. If I remember correctly, it's somewhere around 70%. In Germany, it's maybe somewhere around 45-50%, I think, if I remember the latest numbers on that. Worldwide, there are 2.7 billion users, so every 7th person on the globe is on Facebook. So it's a pretty big penetration, but obviously there's variation from country to country. Yeah.
So for Facebook users, when you are a Facebook user, if you are sampled by Facebook for this, then you will get something on your page.
Correct.
Onto. Then there will be, of course, the responses are going to be on a voluntary basis.
Correct.
And the probability weights are based on the responding Facebook users compared to the total Facebook users.
Correct. So the first set is of everyone who got invited, and then those that didn't participate, even so they got invited, the weight reflects that set of people that's missing, and internal variables available to Facebook are used for that. For privacy reasons, we don't know all the variables that go into that list, but the data science team has been working very hard on sort of evening that non-response out. Correct.
And for calibration, the only two indicators, variables which are used are age and sex. If I
For the
remember.
correct, for calibration, the only ones that are used are age and sex. For the data that we share publicly on the API, for the individual microdata, because the survey respondents themselves give demographic information about themselves, anyone using the microdata can do additional calibration or post-certification with the data using other population benchmarks. So there's, much more is possible for stratification. I mean, for post-stratification purposes. But what we provide upfront on the public API is just using those two. Correct.
Okay, thank you. Another question, and I'll read the question. Are there ways to include data from offline survey to also correct for differences between Facebook users and non-Facebook users?
Yeah.
Meaning, if non-Facebook users are fundamentally different, then I'm not sure, one participant is saying, if post-stratification would suffice.
Absolutely. I mean, we're totally in sync. What I have done and what we've encouraged a lot of partners to do that we talked to through the WHO and other places was that we said, ideally you field some of the core outcome variables also on an offline survey and then see how the responses compare, and then you could do a small area estimation and blend those two data sources. So that is a good way, or you go with some background and demographic variables that already exist and then use that.
Maybe you mentioned it earlier, but what are the typical response rates in these surveys?
They're tiny. They're really tiny. I mean, you saw those last tables. I can share that back up on the screen here, right? I mean, it's hard to compute response rate because you could argue, well, so if we look at this one here, right, we had, well, tiny isn't maybe the right sense. So this is, we had 15,000 people who were reached and then 900 of them clicked it, right? But with the privacy image, we had a reach of 20,000. So many more people were shown this, but in the end, only 253 clicked on that. And, so these advertisements, they are interest driven. I don't have the same metrics for the ones that see it on the news feed. So the way we sample in the COVID symptom survey. Yeah. But I mean, in general, we know that web surveys, collected in this way can have pretty low response rates. Yeah.
Thank you, Frauke. I'm going through the questions, and we did receive some questions before. I'm also checking those questions. The verification. Can you say a little bit more about how you verify whether the results?
Yeah, so on the COVID survey, there are, of course, the trends data that can be used for the verification, right? I mean, so remember the initial attempt was to have an early symptom survey, right? And so eventually people get tested, eventually they show up in the hospital, meaning if we can predict well what's going to happen 2 weeks from now or 10 days from now, then there is, that's a good validity check. And that certainly has worked very well for the US, and CMU has done that in great detail. It has worked very well in Brazil. I know teams have been using it for that. And so those were very encouraging results for me. We don't have validation studies for every single country, but I invite everyone here on the call to apply for using the microdata or to use the API data to see, if this sort of predicts in the way expected, or if, some of the questions match what you have. We certainly have an eye on that also with, now the reports on vaccination and vaccination uptake. There it's less of a prediction part, but basically seeing do the numbers fit. And if you go to the Social Data Science Center website at the University of Maryland, you can see that there is a report about vaccination in Germany, and we see that the numbers of people, the percentage of people we would estimate being vaccinated based on our survey compared to the vaccination rates reported in Germany by state very much match the population number, I mean the official reports on vaccination. Yeah.
Sorry, another question still related to calibration. We seem to be getting a lot of questions about the sampling aspects and bias aspects of this, understandably, because this is a data collection webinar. Another question which is very related to an earlier question is, let's assume that in some countries there's low internet penetration, and the majority of the users are actually from one location, from the capital city. Then would calibration still help?
It would only be interesting data for the capital, right? I mean, I'm not pretending that this is sort of globally and equally distributed, equally good data, right? You could still argue and say it's like, okay, even outside the capital, as long as we have sufficient numbers, we have we don't report data like we aggregate by 100 cases, and so on the API we share out if the data are large enough, and then we take those. But yeah, that it is a it clearly, if no one responds, then we can't say anything about that. And you will see that sometimes the maps we report are grayed out because we feel like we don't have sufficient cases to make the report stable enough. Absolutely.
How is the sample size determined? I'm just translating sort of reinterpreting one of the questions. The question is actually who and how is it decided how many Facebook users will be reached for different topics?
Just give me a second.
Sure.
So sample size is determined by well, it's sort of a mixture. I mean, we try to get sufficient signal so that we have data that are valid reports, but we don't want to overburden the participants on Facebook too much, right? So we will have a situation in which so for the US, for example, right, we wanted to make sure that we get stable county estimates, and we know that, let's say, there's 2 or 3% of the people will be responding maybe to that invitation. And so, that is factored into the people who get the initial invitation, but it does vary obviously by country because the participation rates vary by country and the like. Unfortunately, we have been so bogged down with the methodology that I didn't have time to do the kind of survey methodology, methods reports that I would normally do. It would be totally cool if I could share that with you, but I just didn't have the time to do it yet.
Thank you, Frauke. Again, still on the subject,
Okay.
the probability of responding to a survey invitation on Facebook also depends on the time each user has been using Facebook or exposed to Facebook. Is that also taken into account in the weighting?
That's a good question. I can't speak to that because I don't know which variables are used for this internal for these, in these internal weighting procedures. It could be part of the non-response weight, but I don't know. I don't have any insights into that. As I said, for privacy reasons, we don't know that, so that we can't factor out, the information that people leave on Facebook. because if you have enough computational power and you know what the variables are and what the categories are, then you could reconstruct out of the weights the actual values, and we wanted to avoid that. So that's why we don't have any insight into that.
Thank you, Frauke. If I remember correctly, you mentioned that questions on mental health are also used as part of it, right?
That's correct.
Can you give us a little bit more information on what kind of questions they are? What aspect of mental health? I'm asking this also because there's a lot of interest in the topic in terms of inclusion in robust data collection like household surveys at present.
Yeah. I wish I had that ready. Let me see if I can quickly pull up the questionnaire. But maybe this is a good exercise here in showing you the web page where you can find all these informations. Hold on. Just 1 second here. On the so let me share my screen again. What I'm showing you here is social data science website, right? And this is the report on vaccination, but down here where it says, where you can access the data and get more information, there you see, the information is linked to the ArchiveX paper that I mentioned, the sampling and weighting methods. And if you click on that Maryland API page, you see here on the survey homepage itself, you see a link to a link to the questionnaire. I see an overview of the survey design details, and then you can choose the survey version. So you see the 10 different versions we have on this, and let's look early on at the questionnaire, and then you get a PDF for each of the version that's pulling up here, and then we can look jointly on the mental health question. So this is all publicly available very quickly, though maybe not quickly enough to share it with you. But so these are the surveys on behavior, mask wearing, last 7 days. Yeah, so here are the mental health questions. So did you, during the last 7 days, how often did you feel so nervous that nothing you could calm you down? And then did you feel so depressed that nothing could cheer you up? How worried are you that someone in your neighborhood? Okay, that was a different one. These are the types. I encourage you to look more deeply. They changed a little bit from wave to wave, but the core one, I thought we had 5 different ones that had to do with these feeling nervous, feeling depressed, feeling sad. So the kind of indicators that is used for mental, like global assessment of mental health.
It will be interesting for many, I think, to browse through these questions. Many of our participants. Of course, we had a glimpse of the questions that have been used, but are there any recommendations on the length of the survey or the maximum number of questions for the platform?
Yeah, so as short as you can do it, that would be my recommendation. It's very difficult to keep people engaged. They might take the survey on the bus, while walking, while waiting. I mean, anywhere, because many do that through their mobile devices. And so having it as short as possible is key, and having simple questions, simple answer categories. It's certainly very different than a phone survey or face-to-face survey would be. That holds in general for web surveys, but in particular for this one. Yeah.
One of our participants is once again emphasizing it would be really great to get links to anything on methodology. So
what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna post the site link that I was just at to you, and from there everything else is linked to. So the ArchiveX paper, the sampling methodology questionnaire. So you will find it all through that to take you
right.
on.
If there's links in the presentation, we will be sharing the presentation as well.
Sounds great.
With our participants, so everyone
Yeah.
can get access to all the publicly available documentation on this.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
I think those are the questions that I see at this point. If there's any other questions, anyone else, please put in right now. And we can always, I believe we can.
Yeah. I mean, we are available for follow-up. This works great for me. I have, you know, some family members to take care of right now, and so I'm a little, you know, stretched in between tasks. And so, keeping this shorter for today it works for me. But I'm super happy to answer questions over email, and if you want to follow up, and I hope that you will be intrigued to use the data and maybe do some validation. If you do, let me know what comes out of it. I would be gladly adding that to the presentations in the future.
Absolutely. We had, of course, participants from all time zones almost today. So I'm guessing that in various parts of the world where UNICEF is active, our colleagues are going to be very interested in this.
Great.
And try to see if there's use in their own regions and countries. Thank you very much, Frauke. I will pass on the floor to Archana to wrap us up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again.
All right, great.
Thank you very much, Frauke. That was very interesting and engaging conversation and discussion. And thank you again. I'd just like to tell all the other participants that we are continuing with the series, and next week we'll have Helena, who is will be discussing. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought here. On May 7th, May 7th, at the same time, and the webinar is entitled "Creating a Better Future with Drones." And Helena is the CEO and founder of Globee, a tech company. And also, she was named World's Top 50 Women in Tech. So it'll be an interesting conversation. We will continue after a week's break on May 20th, and then continue after that. So I hope you'll join us for that next week. And thank you very much all for your participation. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, and see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.